Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
Philosophical Investigations, published posthumously in 1953 by Ludwig Wittgenstein, stands as a monumental contribution to 20th century philosophy. Its exploration of language, meaning, and mind represents a profound departure from his earlier work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. This essay will undertake a detailed, section-by-section evaluation of philosophical investigations, examining its central claims, arguments, and conceptual frameworks with critical precision. We will dissect the intricacies of Wittgenstein's later philosophy, paying particular attention to the methodology he employs and the implications arising from his novel perspective on language. Section 1: Critique of the Augustinian Picture of Language. Wittgenstein initiates his investigations with a critique of what he terms the Augustinian picture of language. This view, derived from Augustine's Confessions, presumes that language primarily functions to name objects, with words serving as labels attached to corresponding entities. Wittgenstein challenges this simplistic model, asserting it presents an impoverished understanding of linguistic diversity and its actual use. He argues that focusing solely on ostensive definition, the act of pointing and naming, overlooks the manifold ways in which language operates within various contexts and activities. He presents a scenario involving builders using specific calls to request particular materials, highlighting how language serves a practical purpose beyond mere designation. The central argument is that meaning is not intrinsic to words themselves, but arises from how words are employed within specific language games. Wittgenstein's initial critique lays the groundwork for his later development of the concept of language games and forms of life, each demonstrating the contextual and pragmatic nature of meaning. This rejection of the Augustinian picture is not merely a semantic quibble, it represents a fundamental shift in perspective regarding the nature of language and its relationship to the world. The analogy is drawn between language and a set of tools, each designed for distinct tasks, highlighting that words possess different functions depending on how they are implemented. Section 2: The concept of language games. The introduction of language games is central to Wittgenstein's project. He introduces this concept to demonstrate that language does not function according to a singular, encompassing logic. Instead, it is comprised of numerous distinct games, each governed by its own specific rules and conventions. These games are not trivial pastimes, but rather represent fundamental forms of human activity that are interwoven with language. Wittgenstein offers examples ranging from giving orders and obeying them, to describing an object by its appearance, to reporting an event. Each practice involves a specific set of linguistic rules and assumptions, demonstrating that the meaning of a word is determined by its use within a particular game. The rules of a language game are not fixed or immutable, they are subject to change and adaptation as circumstances evolve. Furthermore, entering into a language game involves accepting its associated rules and behaving accordingly. To misunderstand a language game is to misunderstand the meaning of the words employed within that game. This concept emphasizes the social and practical nature of language, placing it firmly within the context of human interaction and shared practices. It also leads to the understanding that meaning is not a private or individual affair, the public and communal one. Section 3: Meaning as use. Wittgenstein famously declares that the meaning of a word is its use in the language. This pronouncement encapsulates one of the core tenets of his later philosophy. He means to dispel the notion that words possess inherent, fixed meanings independent of their practical application. To understand the meaning of a word, one must observe how it is employed within various language games. This involves attending to the context in which the word appears, the intentions of the speaker, and the responses of the listener. The use of a word is not merely a matter of its external application, it also involves the internal understanding of its grammatical and logical rules. To use a word correctly is to grasp its role within the broader linguistic framework. The shift in focus from meaning as representation to meaning as use is a significant departure from traditional philosophical approaches. It implies that meaning is not a static entity to be discovered, but a dynamic process that is constantly negotiated and renegotiated within social interactions. The emphasis on use also highlights the importance of linguistic competence in understanding meaning. Meaning is not passively received, it is actively constructed through engagement with language and its associated practices. Section 4: Following a rule. Wittgenstein delves into the complexities of rule following, asserting that understanding a rule is not simply a matter of grasping a mental representation. He introduces a paradox to illustrate the challenges involved in determining what it means to follow a rule correctly. He argues that given any rule, there are infinitely many ways to interpret it, leading to the possibility of divergent applications. For instance, consider the rule add 2. After a certain point, one could argue that the rule could be interpreted as prescribing a different calculation, such as adding 4. This raises the question of what constitutes correct application of the rule, and how one can be certain that one is following the rule as intended. Wittgenstein contends that rule following is not a solitary activity, it is inherently social. Our ability to follow rules depends on our participation in a community of rule followers who share a common understanding of the rules and their proper application. This shared understanding is manifested in our practices and responses to each other's behavior. If someone consistently deviates from the accepted application of a rule, they will be corrected by others. The act of rule following is thus embedded within a social context, where shared norms and expectations guide our actions. This interpretation of rule following has significant implications for our understanding of knowledge, meaning and objectivity. Section 5. Private language argument. The private language argument represents one of the most controversial and influential arguments within philosophical investigations. Wittgenstein challenges the possibility of a language that is intelligible only to a single individual. He argues that such a language would be inherently incoherent, as there would be no objective criteria for determining whether the individual is using the words correctly. Imagine a person who experiences a particular sensation and decides to give it a private name. Without any external criteria for comparison, it would be impossible for this person to distinguish between correctly applying a name to the sensation and merely thinking that they are doing so. The distinction between seeming to follow a rule and actually following a rule would collapse. Wittgenstein contends that language presupposes the possibility of making mistakes and correcting them, which requires a shared set of standards and practices. A private language would lack these standards, rendering it impossible to establish any meaningful distinctions. The implications of the private language argument are far-reaching. It challenges the Cartesian notion of a private, in a realm of consciousness that is accessible only to the individual. It suggests that our mental states are not simply private experiences, but are shaped and influenced by our interactions with others and our participation in shared practices. The argument emphasizes the public and social nature of language and thought. Section 6. Sensation and private experience. Wittgenstein extends his arguments about language to the realm of sensation and private experience. He rejects the idea that sensations are inherently private entities that can only be known by the individual who experiences them. He criticizes the view that words like pain refer to inner sensations in a direct and unmediated way. Instead, he argues that our use of pain language is shaped by our social interactions and our participation in shared practices. We learn to express pain through certain behaviors, such as crying, wincing, or groaning. These behaviors are not simply outward manifestations of an inner sensation, they are constitutive of our experience of pain. Wittgenstein suggests that pain is not a purely subjective phenomenon, but is also a social and behavioral one. Our understanding of pain is shaped by our interactions with others and our participation in shared practices. We learn to recognize and respond to pain in others, and this reciprocal interaction influences our own experience of pain. This view of sensation has implications for our understanding of empathy and our ability to understand mental states of a. Section 7. Aspect seeing. Wittgenstein explores the phenomenon of aspect seeing, the experience of perceiving something in a different way. He uses the example of the duck-rabbit illusion, an ambiguous image that can be seen as either a duck or a rabbit. The key point is that seeing the image as a duck is not simply a matter of receiving different sensory input. It involves a change in our interpretation of the image. Wittgenstein argues that aspect seeing is not a purely visual phenomenon, it is also a conceptual one. Our ability to see an object in a certain way depends on our possession of certain concepts and our familiarity with certain practices. For example, to see the duck-rabbit image as a duck, one must have the concept of a duck and be familiar with the characteristics that distinguish ducks from other animals. Aspect seeing reveals the active role that our concepts and expectations play in shaping our perception of the world. It demonstrates that seeing is not a passive process of receiving sensory information, but an active process of interpretation and construction. This perspective on aspect seeing challenges the traditional distinction between perception and thought, highlighting the intimate relationship between. Section 8. Certainty and hinges. Wittgenstein delves into the nature of certainty and the foundations of our knowledge. He argues that our knowledge is not built upon a foundation of indubitable truths, but rests upon a set of assumptions that we take for granted. These assumptions, which he calls hinges, are not propositions that we can justify or doubt. They are the unquestioned background against which our reasoning and inquiry take place. Examples of hinge propositions include the belief that the earth has existed for a long time, or the belief that other people are conscious. We do not typically question these beliefs, nor do we attempt to justify them. They are simply part of the framework that makes our knowledge possible. Wittgenstein suggests that doubting our hinge propositions would be akin to doubting the very foundations of our language games. It would render our reasoning and inquiry meaningless. The notion of hinge propositions highlights the limits of our knowledge and the role of faith and trust in our cognitive lives. It suggests that our beliefs are not simply the product of rational inquiry, but also shaped by our social and cultural Section 9, Philosophy and Grammar. Wittgenstein emphasizes the importance of attending to grammar in philosophical inquiry. He argues that many philosophical problems arise from a misunderstanding of the grammar of our language. By grammar, he does not mean the superficial rules of syntax, but rather the deeper logical structure of our concepts. He contends that philosophical confusion often stems from using words in ways that are inconsistent with their grammatical rules. For example, the philosophical problem of free will may arise from a misunderstanding of the grammar of the words free and will. Wittgenstein suggests that by carefully examining the ways in which these words are used in ordinary language, we can dissolve the philosophical problem. He proposes that philosophy should focus on clarifying our concepts and unraveling the linguistic confusions that give rise to philosophical problems. This approach to philosophy is often referred to as therapeutic because it aims to cure us of our philosophical anxieties. By exposing the linguistic sources of our confusion, philosophy becomes a form of conceptual analysis aimed at clarifying the meaning of our words and the structure of our Section 10 Forms of Life. The concept of forms of life plays a significant role in Wittgenstein's later philosophy. He uses this phrase to refer to the shared practices, customs, and institutions that characterize a particular community or culture. Forms of life are not simply external social structures, they are also internal patterns of thought and feeling. They shape our values, beliefs, and ways of understanding the world. Wittgenstein argues that language is inextricably linked to forms of life. The meaning of our words is determined by the ways in which they are used within specific forms of life. To understand a language, one must understand the forms of life that it expresses. This emphasis on forms of life highlights the cultural and historical contingency of language and thought. It suggests that there is no single, universal framework for understanding the world, but rather a multiplicity of perspectives that are shaped by different cultural contexts. The concept of forms of life challenges the idea that philosophy can provide a timeless and objective account of reality. It suggests that philosophy should be sensitive to the diversity of human experience and the ways in which our understanding of the world is shaped by our particular cultural context. He is not advocating for relativism, but rather acknowledging the embeddedness of our knowledge within specific social and cultural frameworks. Section 11, Evaluation of Wittgenstein's Claims and Revisions. Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations represents a radical departure from his earlier work, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. The Tractatus presented a picture of language as a logical representation of reality, with propositions mirroring the structure of the world. Philosophical investigations rejects this picture, arguing that language is a diverse and multifaceted phenomenon that cannot be reduced to a single logical system. The shift in Wittgenstein's thinking can be attributed to his recognition of the limitations of his earlier approach. He came to realize that language is not simply a tool for representing reality, but also a tool for acting, and his later philosophy emphasizes the practical and social nature of language, viewing it as an integral part of our everyday lives. While the Tractatus attempted to provide a complete and definitive account of language and logic, Philosophical Investigations is more exploratory and open-ended. It does not offer a single, systematic theory, but rather a collection of observations, reflections, and thought experiments. The impact of philosophical investigations on 20th century philosophy has been profound. It has influenced a wide range of disciplines, including linguistics, psychology, sociology, and literary theory. Wittgenstein's ideas have been interpreted and applied in various ways, leading to diverse and sometimes conflicting interpretations of his work. Despite the challenges of interpreting Wittgenstein's cryptic and aphoristic writing style, Philosophical Investigations remains a foundational text for understanding the nature of language, meaning, and conclusion. Ludwig Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations presents a profound and multifaceted challenge to traditional philosophical assumptions about language, meaning, and mind. Through the introduction of concepts such as language games, meaning as use, rule following, and forms of life, Wittgenstein offers a radical alternative to the representational view of language that dominated much of Western philosophy. The essay's detailed exploration of the work's core claims reveals a sustained critique of the idea that language functions primarily to mirror reality. Instead, Wittgenstein emphasizes the practical, social, and contextual nature of language, arguing that meaning arises from the ways in which words are used within specific forms of life. While the interpretation of Wittgenstein's work remains a subject of ongoing debate, its enduring significance lies in its ability to provoke critical reflection on the foundations of our knowledge and the nature of our understanding. The investigations compels us to consider the limitations of philosophical abstraction and the importance of attending to the concrete details of human experience and linguistic practice, ensuring its permanent place within the canon of philosophical thought.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.